Hello, I am Viscount Seamus O'Kelly, and Order of the Laurel, and I am on tiers Apothecary Guildmaster. And today we're going to be going over some of the tools of the apothecary trade, and kind of looking at a history of some of them, and kind of seeing what an apothecary, or maybe even someone who is apothecary adjacent. So, one of those medical fields that kind of overlapped with apothecary. So, a little slideshow, if we can figure out how to get that sucker up. All right. Can everyone see that? Everyone.
Yes, it is up.
Yeah, thank you. So, all right, cool. So, I want to make sure before I start blabbering on. Um, this is apothecary equipment and shops, tools of the trade. Um, I really like pictures, so lots of pictures. And this particular one is from the 1300s, showing some pretty neat little apothecary jars, which I really like. That was one I went, actually, side note, went to a museum once in LA, and saw some firsthand, and it was just really quite amazing. So apothecary shops and equipment. This class is offered by the Ontario Apothecary Guild. The Apothecary Guild offers a certificate of apothecary basics, and this is one of the required classes. It was compiled this year, and I already did my instruction or instructor introduction. So let me move. Sorry, got stuff in my way. All right. The word apothecary is derived from apotheca, meaning a place where wine, spices, and herbs were stored. During the 13th century, it was used to describe a person who kept a stock of these commodities, which were sold from their shop or street stall. This is a late 15th century French manuscript that shows an apothecary, um, and I really enjoyed the doctor doing uroscopy in the background with the person in bed. Um, and it's kind of nice to show uh, the apothecary actually weighing and kind of really being in the act of uh, doing apothecary. The first apothecaries were believed to have traveled or traded in the Middle East, and then as time progressed, they kind of their trade kind of went into Europe. Unfortunately, with many medical professions at the time, most of the apothecaries that were male. All of the ones that we have seen that have studied in our period that I am aware of that were official, quote unquote, apothecaries were men. Um, Boo, patriarchy. Um, However, of course, there were women, wise women, women who studied herbs. Just none of them were, as far as I have found, um, official apothecaries who had a shop and sold in the town, like we think of with apothecaries. Um, and I'm also an English and Irish persona, so a lot of my information is very focused on England. But despite their popularity, despite being through most of our period, they were not actually officially recognized in England until 1606, when they became the Society of Apothecaries. Um, and then the recipes for wine, syrups, cordials, medicines, and stuff like that were passed down through generations and were closely guarded. So even though they weren't officially part of, they didn't part of their own guild, they still closely guarded their recipes, and kind of a master apprentice, your information got passed down. Um, and so, even though they weren't recognized until 1606, apothecaries were originally members of the Grocers Guild. Um, And together, these tradesmen can be traced back to the Guild of Peppers, an association formed in the city in 1180. Some of the most popular medicines were prepared in advance, ready for sale, just as in a modern day pharmacy. And in fact, some of the ingredients or some of the treatments were actually required by law to have sat for a period of time. The theriac, which is one of my very, very favorites, was required to at least have sat a year before it could be sold. The theriac was based on Mithridates' uh, antidote. It was used to protect a person from being poisoned. So it was something you took prophylactically. You had to take it every day with your wine, and it would protect you from being poisoned. And they vary within our period from 20 some ingredients to 76 ingredients. Some of them involve animal parts if you were trying to protect from poisons. So it was a very extensive, very expensive treatment, and you were required, if you were going to sell it, that had to at least sit for a year in age. Other cures were prepared for as and when needed due to storage restrictions or perishability. So I don't know if anyone has, when you make a water or a decoction, a lot of the time they're good for a week and then they start growing mold. So those are the type of cures that would be prepared for when a patient came in and said, I have this and I need a treatment. The apothecary would make the water or the decoction and right there, because they're not going to have the treatment that they make and spend all this money on their ingredients just to have it go bad in a week. Treatments were made up with the apothecary, not only using the knowledge of the patient and the illness, but also the ingredients. We know from studying the diagnostic practices of period that many of them believed that the planetary bodies, the planets and the sun and all this ruled over your body parts, right? But they also ruled over the illnesses, and they also ruled over the plants. And so an apothecary would have to know what part of the body we were treating, what the illness was, which planetary bodies ruled over them, and then pick plants or other ingredients that would best treat said illness. So trained physicians were super expensive. It was something that really only the upper class had any access to. And so the apothecary were really the people that served the common people. So if you felt like your your illness was a little bit more than the neighborhood wise woman could handle, you went to the apothecary kind of thing. It was a step up above an herbalist and kind of below a physician. So they were kind of a middle ground, kind of really saw a lot of people, as well as providing sweets or spices and stuff like that. They were really well-rounded. And if you kind of look at modern times, up until chain pharmacies really took over, you can kind of still see that clear through until, just a couple decades ago. Excuse me. You can see that apothecaries, or pharmacists as we call them, still kind of had that mentality. There's a lot of that, the gift shop, and then you had all of the over-the-counter stuff, plus your pharmaceuticals. Any questions? All right. So our first real tool that we're going to talk about is the Mortar and Pestle. And a little quote here: "It is necessary to furnish an apothecary with a great mortar of brass weighing 50 or 60 pounds or more with a pestle of iron, a little mortar weighing 5 or 6 pounds with a pestle of the same matter, and a middle-sized mortar of marble and a pestle of wood, and a stone mortar and the same pestle." So, as we can see from this quote, there are various types of mortar and pestles, all based on what you're going to be using it for, um, and made of various types, sizes, and materials. So mortar pestles are a standard tool of apothecaries and physicians. They were used for centuries to grind, reduce substances to powder, and for the mixing of ingredients used in medicine, alchemy, cosmetics, and cooking. So this is a tool that's used, not just in apothecary, but in cooking and alchemy, and people who deal with cosmetics. Because in period, we didn't have uh, Maybelline. Uh, so the ingredients were ground into powder and suspended. So and in fact, it is still used today in apothecaries and pharmacies. Um, we have probably 5 in the pharmacy that I work in. We don't use them a whole lot now. Most things are pre-made in pills, but every now and then, there's something you have to use a mortar and pestle for, to grind, to suspend. Many mortars during the 16th century had motifs, including foliage, creatures, and faces. This one we can see has a device on it. Um, there's some pretty neat ones. Sadly, my personal brass mortar and pestle is not super fancy, but mortar and pestles were also a standard domestic utensil. So your household would have one in the kitchen for the cook to do. Um, to use to grind their spices and such. And the status of the user or shop very well could have played into the type of mortar and pestle used. So kind of the fancier the pestle, or fancier the mortar, the fancier the person. Um, this particular mortar and pestle um, is actually in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was made in 1540 for a magistrate in Holland. It includes Saint Sebastian being shot with an arrow. So it is thought to be used for medicine, because he was um, a protector of plague. And this is actually a pretty similar shape to the one I have, just no Saint Sebastian. Most families of middle class and above produce their own supplies or compounded treatments. And some of the larger households would have several, similar to a professional apothecary. And we see this definitely later in period, when commonplace books came out. Commonplace books are a book written by usually the lady of the house, who writes down not only her recipes or the things that they preserved, but would also write down the common treatments that their house used. And so you know it was definitely common for a household to have someone who treated their own staff, um, and not necessarily an apothecary, but a person who had a little bit of knowledge, um, and so it would be required that that house had a mortar and pestle. Um, and also, as many things were supplied in large loaves or quantities, mortar and pestles were used in daily production of food, and then to crush, the herbs and spices, and grinding your sugar and such. Weights and scales. So this book is A Closet for Ladies and Gentlemen. That is from 1608, and it's how to make a pomander, and they are super fun to make if you ever get the chance. And I kind of highlighted all these different weights. Kind of as a kind of to point out, this recipe is very weight specific, and thus you would need your weights and scales for it. Early in period, we see a lot of recipes where they say a handful of this, a an equal amount of this to this, or twice as much of this as that. And we don't really see a whole lot of measurements. But definitely later, and as we get into some more complicated treatments, or in this case, cosmetic type things, the weights definitely became more important. So this fresco is at an apothecary shop. It's in Italy. It's from the 15th century. And this is another picture that I just really love. I love the background, but it's here specifically because we can see our apothecary worker here using a set of scales. These are balanced scales, fairly common, and you can actually buy sets now. So trading early in period led to the development of wanting to compare weights. So I say I am selling you, an ounce of said ingredient. I want to make sure that I'm actually getting an ounce, especially when we're talking such expensive things. The records of history show the influence of scales as far back as 5,000 to 6,000 BC. Scales and weights are definitely nothing new. The Egyptians and Babylonians, two of the earliest civilizations that used scales. And there are many references in the Hebrew text of the Bible. The type of scales that the Egyptians and Babylonians used were kind of crude, but they were, of course, the scales and weights that kind of led to, the ones that we see more in our later periods. Their scales were actually just a simple beam of wood with a hole at either end and one in the center. The beam was supported by a cord passing through that center hole, and then pans were supported by cords that were passed through the end holes. So, instead of a metal bar that is holding two pans, we just had a board with three holes. This device is called an equal arm balance. Because the weight of a material in one pan equals the weight in the other. So if you are measuring it and you have 1 ounce weight in one side, you will put 1 ounces of your ingredient in the other to measure it. They're also called balance levers, and the center point acts as a fulcrum and a turning point, and there were definitely improvements made over the next 2,000 years. This one is probably not as common in apothecary, but I kind of want to show the progression of weights and scales and or just some variety. So this one is this is a Roman steel yard. It's from approximately 200 BC, and it has been used for centuries. This particular one is from Pompeii. And then we think the name steel yard that we use, so they weren't called steel yards in Pompeii, but the English name that we use them comes from London in the 14th century. And the Roman steel yard was the first example of what we think was a well-constructed multiplying balance. And the idea is that the fulcrum of the scale is not in the center. And so it's a ratio. And so if I have, if it's a 20-to-1, then I can put 1 ounce of weight to measure 20 ounces of my product. The movable hook was used to counterbalance the load, and it's really unclear whether this would be used in an apothecary. But I think it's important to show some variety of scales as well as a history of scales, and it could very well have been used to measure large quantities of stuff, and they have been used even to weigh entire carts of product. Weights. So this is a really cool, super cool set of weights. And this one is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. The Nuremberg is the maker of them, or they were from Nuremberg, and apparently they're particularly well known for their nesting weights. So the container holds a bucket-shaped weight that fits one inside the other, kind of like Russian nesting dolls. And probably they were so well known because they were so highly regulated, and thus we know that if we get a weight from Nuremberg, we know that it is accurate, and we are not going to be losing money when we buy our product. And so each bucket is noted on its weight, and they all stack up and go in this little neat carrying thing that is gorgeous. So common measurements. It's not a physical tool, but measurements, especially later in period, becomes very, very common, and something that I think an apothecary should know. So some common measurements are grain, scruple, which a scruple is 20 grains, a dram, which is 3 scruples, an ounce, which is 8 drams, and a pound, which is 12 ounces. So these apothecary weights obviously look a little different than what we're used to. 12 ounces in a pound, not 16. And then a grain is equal to the troy, and it represents 1/5. 1/5760th part of the troy, and the apothecary pound. Very complicated system. Definitely nothing like the metric system. So it's and there actually are texts out there who discuss the varying weights through period. Not always was a grain, depending on when you were in period, just like a pound is not always a pound. All right, jars and containers. Definitely one of my favorites. So the earliest known drug containers were from trading drugs and spices between Babylonia and Egypt around 2250 BC. They were quite often unglazed earthenware, similar to this one that we have pictured, as well as some that were alabaster. And then approximately 750 years later, Egypt has started using glass for some very expensive substances. The Greeks and Romans used alabaster, earthenware, glass, horn, lead, onyx, and silver. And then in De Materia Medica, Dioscorides writes that some could be kept in glass, horn, silver, while botanical should be stored in limewood boxes. So we have some varieties of types throughout our early history, and we can see different ways that ingredients were stored. So this is the type of jar that we most often think of when we think of apothecary jars. And these are the ones that you see in a lot of the middle to late period in the backgrounds of apothecaries. this is actually one that I have seen in person. Just so exciting. And so they made their way from Persia. Earliest we can find them is about the 10th century. And then they made their way to Italy in the 14th century, and then Western Europe in the 1500s. You will notice that this jar does not have a scroll on it or a place for a name. So this means that this jar was likely had more than one purpose. So there were jars that could be made with a blank label where you could write with like a grease pen or some pencil or something on it, some sort of writing utensil, what is on it. Or they would, in the process of putting the waxed or linen top on it with a string, would have some sort of label. So these type of jars would be used to store products that maybe you didn't always have in stock. They weren't your super common things. These were, something that you got seasonally. Maybe you kept your product in when you got it, and then you used it out, and you set it aside till you wanted to fill your next jar. Here's a couple more different types of jars that we have. The one on the left is from Central Asia, about the 10th century. So this one has an Arabic inscription on it. It's not super common. And then the one on the right is from the 14th century. And it actually has a crest of a family. There's a super great later period German book that has an image of an apothecary, and all of the apothecary jars have different devices on them, and I think it's just super neat. And there's some speculation on what those meant. Were those families that apothecary oversaw and made treatments for? And so kind of these are the people that I serve, look at me, or was the person who was making the woodcut, because at this point it was a printed one, was the person who was making it saying, look at these, there's an apothecary, and there's a bunch of things on there I don't really know, so I'm just going to put these images. We don't really know exactly why they had a bunch of different devices, but I just think it's super cool. Surgeon chests and medical chests. So we have the need, if you are a surgeon or apothecary for someone who travels. So specifically, if you are for military, or if you're part of a large household that goes on, like, the king who goes to see his lands. And so if you are the apothecary or the surgeon for one of these people, or for the military, you need to travel with your ingredients. It does not make sense to have to go buy them wherever you are and not know whether you're going to have what you need. So this particular one is a very late period, 1570s. He was the last governor, the last Genoese governor of Chios, which is in the eastern Aegean Sea. And then he ruled it until 1566, when it was captured by the Turks. And it is really just the most gorgeous medical chest. You can see that the top has a great painting on it. That is a little out of our period. It was added later. Um, and there is actually on the top outside of it, I believe, is his personal device or his family's device. So it contains 126 bottles and pots for drugs, scales, a pair of brass weights from a nested set, a marble mortar with an agate pestle, 2 brushes, small pewter boxes, and organic material. 95 of the drug containers still carry paper labels, which are legible or partially legible. And of the 39 items of materia medica which can be identified, 27 are given by Dioscorides, 34 by Matinelli, and 21 by Fiorentino. And then there are 3 things that are not listed in either of those. One of them is unicorn horn. So obviously, not really unicorn horn, but this is definitely a set that would be great to reproduce. There are um, there are papers that are written all about the contents of this chest, and you can actually see the breakdown of what's on each pay or each level and what it is, and then you can find its reference in which herbal the original is from. Another later period surgeon's chest is the Mary Rose. They have it on display at the Mary Rose Museum. And I, of course, love it because it is Tudor in English. I apologize to people who are not for, only caring about it. So the remains of the surgeon's cabin, when they pulled the Mary Rose out, found this chest in there. So in his cramped cabin, he would have acted as the doctor, the dentist, and the pharmacist. And within this wooden chest contained canisters filled with ointments. So these would have been the treatments that were, of course, made ahead of time, that were in an ointment form that have a long shelf life. And then also, we found one of the canisters that still had peppercorns in it. Of course, the other canisters that were empty, that had material in it that were most likely dried herbs and stuff like that, to make your ingredients or to make your treatments that don't have a shelf life. It sat at the bottom of the water, and those were destroyed. But it is likely those contained herbs that you would use to make those other ingredient or other medicines. I'd also had 2 metal syringes, and they're not syringes like we think of today. And actually you can see it in the bottom front of that picture. They were used for wound washing and stuff like that. They were not needles on the end. They were a tube with a hole, and you could stick it in the wound and actually flush medicinal waters through to try and keep the patient from having infection. It also included razors, a whetstone, and a shaving bowl. That bowl also can be used for bloodletting, so super fun. And there is a medical text, or there is a text that goes through the contents and breaks it down, put out by the Mary Rose Museum. That's a little hard to find and kind of expensive, but it is there. It's a quick stop off on sieves. Not anything too exciting, but there are some treatments that ask for them to be sieved, especially if you are doing a a treatment that you are going to suspend something in honey, um, and then mix it later in a wine or something like that. You don't want big chunks of plant material uh, floating about and getting stuck in your teeth. Um, so, like the theriac, which I was talking about earlier, all of the ingredients are ground into a powder and suspended in honey, and you let it sit, and then you make almond-sized bits of it and dissolve it in your wine every day. Because first thing I wake up, I drink a glass of wine. Like, it doesn't sound too bad. But so you want this to dissolve as well as it can. We're obviously putting plant material into wine, so it's not going to really dissolve like you would think sugar. But you want it as fine as possible so that you don't notice it when you're drinking. And so sieves were used to get all the larger chunks out, because I don't care who you are, there's no amount of grinding on a mortar and pestle where you can get everything into a fine powder. It just, unless you have one of those ones for painting that are like glass on glass, you can probably get everything to a powder with one of those. But so sieves were quite often a metal screen, wooden frame. You can find those now. They're not too terrible. All right, distillation tools. So this particular recipe is for making a sweet water, and distillation is the chemical process in which certain anyways, with certain constituent components were extracted from liquids through heating, condensation, and then collection of that condensed liquid. Um, and so I highlighted where in this we're going to be stilling 3 times in the process. Distillation tools became all the rage in late period. We know that if you had a manor house, you had a mini still for making your own waters. Um, we also know Henry VIII. Henry VIII was not only a terrible person, but he was a amateur apothecary, and he dabbled quite a lot with stilling his own stuff. There's a handwritten text by him and 4 physicians, and we know that he found great joy in making his own things, and we know that he stilled his own waters. So in this particular treatment, or this particular sweet water, we're going to still our roses. We're also going to still the leaves, and then we're going to add it all together and distill the whole thing. So the most common part of your distillery tools is going to be a lembic. An alembic is an apparatus in which is used for distillation of various substances, mostly liquids. And it's kind of, our most common shape is going to be on the left, third one down. And the process is, a lot of the common ones had 2 containers. The one that is round bottom that you put your stuff into and then heat up, and then your alcohols from your material vaporize, go to the top of your alembic, and then they condense and drip down and out your spout. There are a couple people within the SCA who actually make pottery ones. Um, so they're you can get them uh, if you are looking to increase your own apothecary tool collection. Um, they're fun to play with, and I hope to actually do some distillation, but you know, not moonshine or anything illegal. Um, so the word alembic can be used to describe both the entire apparatus or part of the apparatus in which the condensation occurred. So when we're referring to an alembic, it can be the entire thing, or we can be just talking about the top part where the vapors go up into. Alembics are made of pottery or glass. They were used in medieval and early modern periods to distill alcohol, um, which the process is very likely first done in Italy around 1100, um, and mineral acids, so like sulfuric acid, nitric acid, things like that. Sorry, I have this tickle in my throat. Um, and this picture, as well as the previous picture, are from the um, first in-depth examination of distillation. So we know they were doing it previous. It's mentioned in various medical texts, but in the totally going to butcher his name, Brunswick, uh, das Buch zur Distillerin, is where the pictures are from. And let's see, it was the first edition is from 1500. Um, and so these couple images are from that. And then they were used in households to make spirits and medicine. They were used in the workshops of alchemists in various experiments, and were even used to kind of determine the properties of metal and ore. Obviously, not by an apothecary or in your household, but the, the tool was used. And then here are a couple fun pictures of distilling. The one on our left shows quite the impressive um, distillery tool here. So as we can see, the four cone shaped things are our alembics. And we can tell that inside that box is something hot, as there is smoke coming out the little chimneys. And so we can assume that inside there is a giant, four giant pots, or one huge one, where our item that we put in there is steeping in water, and then the vapors are going up into the cone, condensing, running down the cone and out the tubes into our bottles. And then in the one on the right shows quite a few different ones, and alembics in various shapes. And we can see the kind of in the center, the um, chimney looking things are obviously where we have built our fire inside, and it's heating up into our alembic and down into the collection device. All right. So our next little tool is a Euroscopy flask. And I was going to touch on it real quick because there is a whole class on that covers uroscopy as well as other diagnostic things. So, but uroscopy is the medieval examination of urine in order to facilitate a diagnosis of a disease or disorder. And so on our left here, we have a uroscopy wheel that shows various colors of urine and what that means. And it can most of them contain about 20 different colors, from white as well water to ruddy as pure intense gold, and last black as very dark horn. Um, Flasks were most commonly used to examine a person's urine, had a round bottom, like we see on this extant one from the 15th century in the Museum of London. And the clearer and freer of the clearer and the free of glass bubbles is the higher the quality of the flask. So it's probably very likely that the more wealthy you were, the clearer and finer your flask. Knives and fleams, all the things for cutting. Um, so on our left here, we see we're harvesting wheat, but um, it is a sickle-like knife, and there are references to using that shaped knife to cut and harvest your herbs. A little quote about purging blood. Um, so now, if you will purge blood in the morning, open a vein, except for the very old or young, or person consumed, or woman with child. And on our right, we have a person being bled and a fleam being used to open the vein and a bowl to collect the blood. So knives for harvest or preparation. So I kind of separated them into two types. So our knives here for harvest or preparation, though treatments kind of became less superstitious as we went along, um, we see a lot of treatments that ask for a particular type of knife. Um, and so we see some that have to be made out of a certain material or a metal type, particular shapes. Some need to be wet, they say, or dry, or there's some where you stick the knife in the ground, in the earth before you harvest your whatever, which sounds like a terrible idea to get your knife dirty before you use it. Others say cover them with various oils or greases. There's one that I just read the other night that you cover your knife with sheep suet before using it. And then some of the treatments also require the knife be used by a particular person, particularly early when they're a little bit more superstitious. You must send a woman out, or the knife must be used by an old man or an old woman or a young virgin boy. There are, of course, references to them being used by a red-headed boy or a red-headed girl. There's even some where it talks about blonde and so some of these knives, while the knife itself doesn't have to be made out of particular something, the person using it must. And then there are also some that require them be used at the right time of the year or particular phase of the moon. So there are some treatments that require when harvesting your plants, you do it at a particular time. And then the picture here on our right is just a little out of period, 1603. It is a botanist with a really cool tool. I might have a couple of them. One of my SCA friends made me one as a gift. It's amazing. So it can, it's super neat. It's got a pick on one side. So if you're digging and want to break the ground, you can. It has a little axe-like thing for cutting and chopping. And on the end, it has a spade. So you can dig and with it. It is just the coolest tool. Fleams and bloodletting bowls. So our second type of cutting device. So there are a couple different types of bloodletting, and I just kind of focused on fleams, which is not scarification. Scarification, they have tools that have a bunch of little sharp bits that go over over the skin and make little shallow cuts and nicks, whereas fleams were made to actually open a vein. Um, there is references to sharp thorns or sharpened stones being used to bloodlet, and there are several examples of Roman fleams known to them as phlebotomus, which is actually on the right side. The top one is an extant Roman fleam. Down the next one is kind of the middle time within our period where we kind of, that's kind of the shape we think of a fleam. The first recorded mention of a fleam appears to be in an Anglo-Saxon manuscript from around 11,000. And then the works of French surgeon Ambrose Perry, two fleams featured on the bottom there, actually show a blade for slitting on one side where the blunt side is used to keep open the wound. Bloodletting bowls, which kind of goes with it, are used to collect the blood. Some have a cutout like this one here, where the arm of the patient will slide into it. Others have a little handle, which you would just hold under the wound. Just a real quick look at some herbals. So a very valuable tool of any apothecary would be their herbal or their medical text that they used. So an herbal is any book that contains the names and description of plants, as well as they will sometimes contain non-plant materials, animals that are used in treatments, or minerals. And it will contain the information on their medical uses, if they're toxic or not, whether they're used culinary in food, whether they have a smell, if they have any magic powers, quote unquote. And then a lot of the time, they'll have an illustration so your person can tell what it is. Although at this point, these type of images is really hard sometimes to tell what it is you're looking at. So some classical herbals. Two of the most common, De Materia Medica by Dioscorides, originally from 770 AD. Describes nearly 600 plants and has approximately 1,000 simple drugs. A Natural History by Pliny the Elder. We're not exactly sure when he wrote his, but we do know he was born around 23 CE and he died in the eruption of Vesuvius. So we know it was written at some point in that period. His is made up of 37 books, though not all of them are medicinal plants. There are some 2,000 manuscripts referenced in his book, which I think is just amazing. 33,000 items listed, and he references 400 other authors. Physica by Hildegard, originally from 1150. So these are Middle Age herbals. These are kind of a real lull in herbals. There's not a whole lot written at this time, but she is the earliest book in natural history written in Germany. She is also considered the mother of botany. She is, one of the very early women writers of medicinal stuff, and it included recipes that had been handed down by generations from her predecessors. So Hildegard was an abbess, and so we know that monasteries and the church people that oversaw people helped the people of their parish or their area would have had medical stuff that was handed down from one to another, and so she wrote those down. Then our other middle-aged is the Tactonum Santatus. It is the medical health handbook. There are 4 illustrated manuscripts that are still in existence. They were found in 4 different places. They were believed to all been written by the same person or group of people. and it has about 6 things that are necessary for health, as well as goes over not only your food that you should eat, the treatments that you should do, but what winds you should be in, or what clothes you should wear, what activities you should do. And so it kind of does like this all-encompassing, all these things affect your humors. This is what you need to do to treat. And then our post-printing herbals, a couple references, a couple options here. Gerard's Herbal, which was published in 1597. First illustration of a potato, which is super exciting because potatoes. It has 1800 woodcuts. It is very fluid and lively reading as herbals go. I would say not something you just sit down and read, but I do, so maybe. It was super popular with your just your ordinary literate people. So late in our period, but you're just kind of more average, quote unquote, literate person would read that versus like highly trained medical. And then the other is William Turner's A New Herbal from 1551. And it kind of has a systematic survey of English plants. It's the first time written in English vernacular. So, quite often we see medical texts written in Latin. This one was actually written in English. And it opened up, it's kind of the start of opening up this herb lore to a wider group of people in England. And finally, we have almanacs. So our last little bit of text-like tool. So in the late 1500s, it actually became illegal for a physician to treat a patient. Ooh, running out of time. Quick. It became illegal for a patient to treat a physician without properly referencing the position of the stars and the moon. So if I was treating a person and they died, and then they could prove that I didn't do a star chart ahead of time, I would be liable for killing this person. And so physicians would carry a text with them that had references that they could use as kind of like your physician desk reference. And they would bring it with them, and they would use this to make star charts and stuff like that, as well as referencing the uroscopy wheels, or to look at the which part of your body was ruled by which part. So the genre of almanac dates to the period of Ramses, which include books as pamphlets or single sheets or folded mini books. So almanac is a general term. The ones we focus on are medical. And so then with the invention of the printing press in the 1400s, almanacs moved to a more common place and more widely used, and went from handwritten to printed. So a medical almanac will contain some combination of the bloodletting man. So it's the guy drawn out, and you can see his veins, so you know where to stab the person. An astrological physical discourse, so a reminder on what parts of the body does what. The zodiac man, which is our little image of the guy with the different zodiac bits on him. A uroscopy chart, like we saw before. An eclipse and moon diagram, so we know what the phases of the moon are. The sphere of Apuleius, which actually uses numerology to determine whether a person is going to survive or not. Super fun. The dates of the feasts, a tide table, chronological history stuff. So they'll have like the list of rulers or stuff like that, dependent on your area, and a calendar. So Apothecary covers our entire period and every part of the globe. So there are tools are varied, and they, what is used here might not be used there. So this is kind of a general, might not fit all of your times, might not fit all of your places. We definitely did not cover all the tools of apothecaries. We could practically have an entire class on each tool. So, so hopefully this has kind of increased your own desire to study apothecary, and you can go find your own tools. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm stopping the recording now.